Welcome to High Cheese with Darren Maloney. Today is Friday, February 25th, 2022. So, Russia attacked Ukraine. Full onslaught. The full Monty. And we only have the Biden administration to blame for this. Because of their weakness, because of their clownishness, we have this. You have to understand, guys like Putin, guys like Xi, a lot of other people on the international level, they only respect strength. And we're not getting that from Biden. John Adams once said, "We are a government of laws, not of men." But I like to add that it is also very important who those men and women are implementing those laws. And among Biden, Jake Sullivan, Harris, and Blinken, we have clowns. We have weak clowns there. And Putin has fed off of that. Now, let me just frame this for you. It helps me too. There's 4 points going up to this that I just want to point out that shows Biden's weakness and what has helped fuel this invasion of Ukraine. Now, the first one is in 2014 when Putin invaded Crimea, which is in the southeast portion of Ukraine. And that was when Obama was president, Biden was vice president. And they threw some sanctions on them, said, "Oh, that's a bad thing, it's a bad thing." And there was outrage for a news cycle or two. But it essentially went away. People ignored it. Putin didn't ignore it. He saw weakness. And when Biden got elected president in 2020, he just said, "Oh, man, this is great. I got an opportunity to take some more." Now, the second thing is that one of the first things that Biden did when he became president, he signed an executive order to cancel the Keystone Pipeline. Now, essentially what that did, it made much more difficult for the United States to get any oil from Canada. Now, the only alternate route to get oil from that area is to not truck it down, but to put it on trains and send it via train to the United States. It makes it harder and impedes the profitability of sending oil down to the United States if you're one of the pumpers in Canada. And so what that did is that increased everyone's reliability on Russian oil. Now, Russia's a big producer of oil. And we import Russian oil. Putin like that. He goes, "Hey, that's another market for me. That allows me to sell more oil to the United States." And then when you add in the fact that one of the additional things that Biden did is he banned any new drilling on government land. So it essentially casted a pall over the existing United States oil sector. Now, the third thing that he did is he removed sanctions for some unknown reason. At first, when I read this, I thought maybe Hunter Biden was involved with this. But he removed all sanctions from Nord Stream 2 project. And that was in April and May of 2021. The cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline was in January, I think January 20th, believe it or not, in 2021. So he cancels the sanctions that Donald Trump put on Nord Stream 2. Now, for those that don't remember, Nord Stream 2 is that new pipeline that was being built at the time from Russia directly into Germany. Now, I think Germany gets about 40% of its natural gas, or maybe even more, from Russia. And this pipeline was supposed to make it easier for Russia to send natural gas to Europe. And Donald Trump had a big problem with this. I don't know if you remember. Remember his visits with NATO? He always brought up the point to Angela Merkel at the time. Look, why are you buying or why are you building this gas pipeline from our enemy? The reason that NATO is there is to protect all of its members from Russia. So why are you building a pipeline from Russia to Germany? We're making our enemies wealthier. Buy it from the United States, he always said. We'll set up some type of infrastructure. Buy it from us. Don't buy it from our so-called enemy. So Trump then had put some sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Now, it wasn't ultimately going to stop the project, it slowed it up significantly. So when Biden comes along and takes all of Trump's sanctions off, how does Putin read that? Oh, maybe I have a friend here, or maybe he's just weak, or maybe he doesn't know what he's doing, or all three. But this clearly at the time, and the perception of Putin helped Russia. So here we go, late March, early April 2021. That's when Putin begins to increase his troops on the Ukrainian border. Now, no one knows his motivation at the time. Maybe I don't think he made the decision at that point to go into Ukraine. Maybe it just started with some war games he was anticipating. But I think as he saw more and more the fecklessness of this Biden government, he said, wait, maybe I can get something out of this. And he kept on putting more and more troops there. Now, the real kicker on this whole thing, and I think this really turned Putin into high gear on Ukraine, is from July 2021, when we had the entire screwed up withdrawal from Afghanistan. When Putin sat back and said, oh my God, not only is the Biden's administration screwed up, he's reading this as the fighting ability of the U.S. military is not the important thing with the Biden administration. So again, he views that as an opportunity. So all of these things came together with this whole Ukrainian attack. Putin's an opportunist. He saw weakness. He saw Europe as a weakness, particularly Germany, some cases France, some cases England. But there was no leadership there. There were a bunch of people that just like to talk. And then you look at the response of the Biden administration. Once it was revealed to them that, wait a second, what is Putin doing? When they finally realized that, maybe I got a suspicion that they knew early on. They just were afraid, and they didn't want to deal with it. If your so-called enemy, and again, Russia is the number one enemy according to the Democratic Party. Remember the years and years of the Russia collusion, the Russia hoax? Well, I couldn't watch the news when Trump was president without Russia being in the headlines and how bad Russia is. So if they actually thought that Russia was such an enemy and they saw such a buildup starting in April of 2021, why did they ignore it? Because they were weak. And Putin feeds on that. And you look at the response from the Biden administration on this, it's absolutely terrible. And what I want to do is I just want to play a clip. And I'm not going to pick on Jake Sullivan today. I'm going to pick on Ned Price. He's the communication director or the spokesperson for the State Department. And, whatever his position is. But you got to look at this guy. I mean, he's a typical Washington bureaucrat. And he's not the type of guy that you want to be representing the country when you're up against a guy like Putin. So let me play the clip, and let me just frame the clip. He's responding to one of the reporters, and I don't know who the reporter is, but he's getting pushback on this Nord Stream 2 sanctions. Price is just giving a total convoluted response that I don't even know what he's talking about today. And again, a guy like Putin looks at that as weakness. So let's play the clip and then we'll come back.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that your argument is that if you had imposed the sanctions earlier, the Germans wouldn't have the Germans wouldn't have done what they did yesterday, or it would have been a much bigger lift to get them to do that.
What we have said in our strategy has been predicated on the knowledge that transatlantic unity is the most powerful instrument we have.
But look, the pipeline's already been built. Okay. Now, whether it gets turned on or not, is another question.
Right. So
presumably you had more leverage, and I don't understand why you don't think that you would have had more leverage if these sanctions had been imposed before the pipeline was finished.
Had we sanctioned Nord Stream 2 AG, had we sanctioned its corporate office holders, it is far from clear that would have kept the pipeline from going into operation. What the Germans did yesterday was to ensure that the pipeline is no longer part of the equation. So by acting together with the Germans, how we did, when we did, and the way in which we did, we have ensured that this is an $11 billion prize investment that is now a hunk of steel sitting at the bottom of the sea.
All right, well, I don't think you though can prove, and the converse can't be proven either, but you just don't know if imposing the sanctions earlier would have had more of a deterrent effect, or any deterrent
well,
effect.
If we would have made it a sunk cost many months ago for the Russian Federation, I don't think that would have had much deterrent capability.
Well, but it hasn't anyway, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure this out. So the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, if they were done earlier, would not have an effect on whether Russia attacked Ukraine. But they would have effect now? I don't understand. You know, if they have an effect, they have an effect. Doesn't matter if you implement the sanctions when they started to build up or right before them attacking. So I don't understand where he's coming from on this. You know, if he wants to split hairs on something, you know, that's not a way to run your State Department or your foreign policy. And again, the reporter was pushing back on this. Again, I don't know who he is. I have to find out who he is. Ned is doing everything to avoid also the fact that, well, Biden took the sanctions off early on because it was something Trump had put on. So again, my point is that Putin feeds on this scatterbrain foreign policy. And then for some reason, I think, you know, Price seems to think that the mere fact that they got Germany and a couple other members of NATO on board with certain sanctions, that was a victory. Well, your victory should have been keeping Putin out of Ukraine. And that's why I think that they've failed. And they failed from the beginning. Because it was never about stopping Putin. Anything but. And it all comes down to because they were afraid. So let me play you another clip too. And I you know, to me, again, I'm not picking on Price, but let me just play this clip and then we'll come back because I think this is really, really bizarre.
Really quickly also on something Simon said that you and Simon discussed, you know, with this notion of diplomacy still on the table, and now you're saying that it's possible that, you know, Donbass is obviously being attacked, if not actually, then rhetorically, that the Russians are now, you know, acknowledging or recognizing their autonomy and sovereignty. So how can you then justify discussions about diplomacy when this is underway?
And that was a really good question by the reporter. I mean, Price was talking for the past 20 minutes about diplomacy and how diplomacy is going to rectify everything. But then the reporter points out, well, wait a second. They've already invaded. They've already recognized the Russian-leaning section of Ukraine. And they've already sent troops in. And you've already had members of the administration saying the invasion has begun. So did Price not know that this happened? Diplomacy is supposed to prevent the wars. And again, it's just indicative of the clownishness of the Biden administration. And it's sad because Ukraine paid the price. You know, I feel sorry for the people of Ukraine. I feel sorry for the leaders of Ukraine. Here you had all these years, them dangling. Think about it. And I think Biden was part of it. And I think that his son, too, his crackhead son, too, was part of this. They kept on dangling a carrot and stick. The carrot was the getting into NATO constantly with Ukraine, no matter who the president was, what administration was in Ukraine. But they had this carrot. Okay, you know, you work with us, we'll get you into NATO. You work with us, we'll get you into NATO. And I think that was the big part of Hunter Biden's involvement in Ukraine, because the leadership at the time of Ukraine probably thought, oh yeah, we'll take care of Biden. Maybe they'll let, you know, it'll help us get into NATO. And it wasn't only Hunter Biden and Joe Biden that took advantage of this. I'm sure there were other globalists that were taking advantage of Ukraine and telling them, hey, you know, work with us, globalists. We'll make sure you get into NATO. And unfortunately, Ukraine believed them. And when push came to shove, it's like, Ukraine who? Now again, we should not be in Ukraine. I do not want troops in Ukraine. This is Europe's problem. Okay, let's take a quick break. Okay, let me just give you a little of the lay of the land here before I get into a minute on the sanctions that were put in. Russia is still pumping oil to and gas to Europe and to the United States. U.S. likes to talk about Nord Stream 2, but that was always an inactive pipeline anyway. It was new and it just wasn't ramped up. However, Russia still pumped Russian oil into Europe through Ukraine. So they currently have Russian pipelines running through Ukraine right now, even as we speak during this war. And they have Nord Stream 1. Now, Nord Stream 1 also pumps Russian natural gas to Europe. That hasn't changed. That gas is still pumping. And I think that's why the markets ended up today. I'll go into that later. After the market sat back and saw what was really going on, they said, well, what kind of effect is this going to have on us? The pipelines are still open. The spigot is still open from Russia. The only thing they sanctioned is a pipeline that wasn't even working anyway. So the oil is still coming in. There should be a little upward pressure on oil because you just don't know what's going to happen. But oil's still pumping from Russia. It's just this story about the Nord Stream 2. They're sanctioning a pipeline that doesn't even work. So, that's where we are with energy. And that's the big thing with Russia's energy. So some of the sanctions that were put on Russia include sanctions on debt. You can't buy Russian debt in the future. However, if you're currently holding Russian debt, it's okay. Certain banks were excluded from operations. There's a lot of sanctions on some of the larger banks in Russia. And everybody's talking about the SWIFT system. Why did you ban Russia from the SWIFT system? And what the SWIFT system is, it's just an international way of moving money back and forth among countries. And you're only as good as the members, and everybody agrees to use. Most countries agree to use the SWIFT system. Now, there are alternate systems you can use. I know that China is working on their own SWIFT system or the equivalent of a SWIFT system. Don't want to bar Russia from the SWIFT system because essentially they could cut off the oil from Europe. Because if you bar Russia from the SWIFT system, Europe still has to pay for the energy that's coming in from Russia. So if you stop that, how is Europe ever going to pay Russia for the energy, for the oil and the natural gas they send them? And if Europe's not going to pay, Russia's going to cut it off. So that's not going to be helpful. The other thing people talk about too is that they think that the dollar as the reserve currency is protected by the SWIFT system. There's some arguments for, there's some arguments against this, but people don't want to bar them from the SWIFT system because they think it would hurt the U.S. dollar's position as the reserve currency. Possibly, but they don't want to take that chance. So the last I heard is that there are already cracks in the sanctions. Now, I don't know if this is true. I heard that this morning. I heard that there was a carve-out in Italy with the sanctions, and they wanted to carve out all the high-end pocketbooks. So, look, how much is this going to work? How much are these sanctions going to work when, the real hammers haven't been used, and they won't use them? Because, again, it's all about the oil. They got to keep the oil flowing from Russia to Europe. So that's where they are. Right now, militarily, the Russian troops are surrounding Kiev. And I did hear that Putin may want to sit down and talk about a truce or a ceasefire. So we'll see where we go from here. One thing I do know is I don't know whether the Russian army is capable of holding the entire country of Ukraine. And particularly if they take Ukraine and try to hold it and this thing turns into a guerrilla war. I just don't think that Russia wants to do that. So here's what I foresee. I foresee Putin attempting to put his own government in Kiev. And if he can't do that, what he'll do is he'll pull back and essentially separate Ukraine into Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine, for lack of a better word. That's what I think the end game is. Because I really don't think that Putin wants the entire country of Ukraine unless he can put his own stooges in the government. So we shall see. Now, just a couple of items before we wrap up on Russia. Just two things. With Biden, and I don't want to continue beating up on Biden, but it's just so easy. It didn't help him when a press conference about a week ago, he had to walk back comments.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
And again, these comments, he had to walk back a day or two later, and Putin saw this as another sign of weakness. Putin, you want to go in a little bit? We'll just sanction you a little bit. So he's kind of giving him an open door. He says, it depends how far you go in. And that's not the way to run your diplomacy. Now, additionally, the other mistake he made also was right from the beginning saying that the United States would not unilaterally put troops in Ukraine to fight Russia directly. Don't want them to put troops to directly fight Russia, but at least bluff it. You take that off the table right away, early on in this. You may have a little hesitancy from Putin if he knows that the U.S. may unilaterally put their own troops in there, not NATO troops. And this is the magic thing of Trump. And this is why Trump kept Putin at bay. Trump was unpredictable. Now, Trump would have said this. He goes, hey, yeah, we may put our own troops in there unilaterally. And that's one of the reasons why Trump was so effective. He wasn't predictable. And on the international level, there's value in that. Now, Trump is going to speak on Sunday at CPAC. And hopefully he brings this up because, this would not have happened if Trump was still president. I do believe Biden is not a legitimate president. And I hope God isn't making us pay the price for this. Now, with that said, there's only one thing that concerns me right now, and it's Article 5 of NATO. And Article 5 of NATO says that an attack on one of the member countries is an attack on all of them. So say you attack Poland, for example. They're a member of NATO. That means all the countries that are members of NATO will come in and attack you. And what I'm worried about is a false flag. Now, there are evil people out there. And I'm worried about an evil person, whether it's from the U.S. or whether it's from NATO or whomever, wants to create a false flag that draws Russia into responding and attacking a member of NATO. That concerns me. And God forbid it's from our own CIA or somebody else involved with government. And unfortunately, I do think it's possible. And that does worry me. I just hope if that happens that Russia is smart enough not to respond. Okay, let's go up north to Canada. Let's see what Prime Minister Trudeau has done. Well, he revoked the Emergencies Act on Wednesday. And that's just maybe a little over 24 hours past the time that the Parliament approved it. So what happened between Monday night, when Parliament approved the War Powers Act, and Wednesday when he revoked it? That's very strange. But here's a little tidbit that I just find odd. My wife and I were watching the Senate debating the War Powers Act. So according to the law up there, it has to pass both Parliament, the MPs, and it has to pass the Senate. So it passed Parliament, the MPs, and then it had to go to the Senate. So my wife and I were watching the live debates in the Senate. And then an odd thing happened. Suddenly, 9 o'clock came, and the Speaker of the Senate, or whatever the person's name is, stops everything. Just cuts the person debating mid-sentence and says, okay, this is it. We're going to go home. We're closing at 9 o'clock. We're going home. That was it, out of the blue. Just cut one of the speakers off, and they all left. So we looked at each other, and we said, that's kind of odd. And then the very next day, Trudeau repeals the War Powers Act. So two things likely happened. He knew he was going to lose. This was a loser. He was already getting sued by Alberta and likely a couple of other provinces. He was likely going to lose in court. And then maybe he realized that this was embarrassing, what he did, and he looks like a fool to the world. Now, the other thing, too, which is also reasonable to assume, is maybe he didn't have enough votes in the Senate. Now, a good politician will know how many votes you have going into any debate. So maybe in midstream, they figured out they weren't going to get enough Senate votes up there. So they got to the Speaker of the Senate, told him to cut the debate, and then in order to avoid him being embarrassed, he repealed the War Powers Act the next day. And to my knowledge, the Senate has never gone back and approved this. And that's a realistic assumption to make. He was avoiding embarrassment by having this thing shot down by the Senate. Although it was approved by Parliament, it wasn't approved by the Senate. And it needed both approvals. Now, the funny thing, too, is that, did you hear the words that about Putin, an authoritarian? We have to stop. Canada is going to do everything we can to stop this authoritarian Putin. Well, did you ever take a look in the mirror? At least Putin was going after people from another country, Trudeau. You were going after your own people. Now, let's switch to the Supreme Court. So today, Friday, Joe Biden announces his nominee for the Supreme Court. It's Ketanji Brown Jackson. That's her name. I don't know much about her. We'll get into this at a later episode. But actually, I feel sorry for her in a sense. I don't know anything about her. But she will always be known to a good portion of the United States as the check-the-box Supreme Court justice, assuming that she gets in. I don't think it's fair to her. I don't think it's fair to the Supreme Court. But when Biden came out and said, well, I'm only going to take from a pool of African-American women. That's not fair. Are you really getting the best candidate if your pool of candidates is small? Now, I don't want to hear this. Oh, you're telling me that African-American women aren't worthy of the Supreme Court? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Ketanji Brown Jackson should have had more competition instead of from just a small pool of African-American women. I think I said in a previous episode, Clarence Thomas wasn't pulled from just an African-American pool. Clarence Thomas is the smartest guy in the Supreme Court. But you're hindering Miss Jackson with being a check-the-box justice. So we'll get into this at a later episode. Let's take another quick break. back. Just a couple of tidbits I want to cover before we move on to business and finance. And the first thing I just wanted to talk about is the People's Convoy that's starting from Barstow, California, and headed toward Washington, D.C. They were inspired by our Canadian heroes up north, and they want to do something similar down here. So they had started in California, Barstow, California, and they are headed toward Washington. It was 1 or 2 episodes ago I spoke about them, but they started this week, and they're trekking from west to east, and we wish them the best of luck. Now, there's a couple of other convoys that have. One went from Scranton to Washington, but that was scrapped. But this is the big one here. I think it's called the People's Convoy. And again, we wish them luck, and we hope for them a safe trip. And I will be covering them as they move along. Second item I wanted to talk about was a report. And it came out from the New York Times, and it said the CDC is not publishing a lot of COVID-19 data. I'm shocked. Believe that. Believe that, huh? Well, it says here the CDC is not publishing a large amount of data. Well, let me just read a little bit of this article. It's from, I think, WebMD. And it says the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has only published a fraction of the data it collected about the COVID-19 pandemic, the New York Times reported, citing several other people familiar with the data. The CDC published information about the effectiveness of boosters for people under 65 2 weeks ago, but didn't provide the data about people 18 to 49-year-old, the age group least likely to benefit from boosters because they're already well protected by the first 2 shots, the Times said. Some outside health experts were stunned to find out that the CD held back on COVID information. We have been begging for that sort of granularity of data for 2 years. Jessica Malati Rivera, an epidemiologist and part of the team that ran COVID tracking project, told the Times. A more detailed picture would have improved public trust, she said. The Times said the withheld data could have helped local and state health authorities respond during different stages of the pandemic and better protect vulnerable populations. The lack of booster information about 18 to 49-year-olds forced federal health agencies to rely on data collected in Israel on recommendations for booster shots, the Times said. When asked to comment, the CDC spokesperson, Kristen Norland, said the agency held back some information because basically at the end of the day, it's not yet ready for prime time. What kind of response is that? Is that a professional response? The CDC prioritizes making sure information is accurate, she said, adding that the CDC fears the public might misinterpret some information. Really? You don't trust the public for making decisions on their own? And this is the problem. This is what undermines the CDC and everybody involved with this pandemic. Everyone. You have shot yourself in the foot. And I can't wait till the Republicans take over in November because I want a thorough investigation on this entire policy. From the CDC data to what Fauci has done with holding back on therapeutics, going after therapeutics, hiding the generation of the virus itself, whether it was naturally caused or not, that's just a start. But I want a thorough investigation, and I want people called to the floor. And if they have to be brought up on criminal charges, that has to be done. Because these people that have led this whole COVID-19 response for the U.S. have misled us, did not have the agenda of the American people as their own agenda, and they have to pay the price. I know it's harsh words, but they have to pay the price. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is J6. Again, we have another judge making out-of-bounds comments about what their role is in the judiciary process. This is from CNN. It says the man photographed carrying House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's lectern during the January 6th riot was sentenced to 75 days in jail Friday after the judge warned about political division in the U.S., pointing to Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a cautionary example. We're on a dangerous slide in America, Judge Reggie Walton said during the sentencing of Adam Johnson. When the other side wins, rather than accepting it as the American way, believes that they can do whatever they want to get who they want in power sitting in the White House. He went on to say, Walton suggested on Friday the defendant read two of those books, How Civil Wars Start and The Next Civil War, and wondered whether there was anything we as judges can do to stem the hostile environment, this partisan environment that is ripping America apart. Well, how about doing your job? Let's start with that. Now, was a 75-day jail sentence proper for this? Guy was walking around with the Speaker of the House's lectern. 75 days in jail, $5,000 fine? This guy was not an insurrectionist. And where do you come across, Mr. Judge, as calling this person insurrectionist? Or equating January 6th with a Russian attack on Ukraine? You're not helping the case here. And if you really wanted to help, why don't you start talking to these people at your cocktail parties? Ask them not to take advantage of their positions to benefit themselves financially. Because that's what undermines the institutions. When people read in the newspaper that the Fed, members of the Fed are trading stocks, when Congress is trading stocks on inside information, why haven't you said anything on that? Start with that, Mr. Judge. Start with that. And good news. Two prosecutors from the New York that were prosecuting Trump on this bogus investigation, they resigned. Apparently, this new district attorney, Bragg, who is no friend of ours, he said that he had doubts that this case could move forward. So apparently, these two political hacks quit. And this was a bogus, absolutely a bogus investigation. Now, 2 episodes ago, I spoke about the investigation by Letitia James, another bogus investigation. So I'm glad to see that these two hacks resigned. Now, it's likely that this case isn't going to move ahead, and maybe Letitia James should take a look at what she's got on her table regarding Trump and drop it, because it's nothing more than political persecution of the former president of the United States. And Mr. Judge, who was talking about the J6 people, why don't you talk to Letitia James? Why don't you talk to those two prosecutors in New York? You think that's creating harmony in this country? Anyway, that's good news. Okay, let's switch to stocks. And it was a wild week on Wall Street this week. Again, today is Friday, February 25th, 2022. Markets closed, and it was an absolutely wild week. And it was all driven by Russia attacking Ukraine. It was up 500, down 500, down 800, then up 300. Today, on Friday, it finished up 2.51% to 34,058. For the year, the Dow is down 6.27%. The S&P is up today 2.24% to 4384.65. For the year, the S&P is down 8%. NASDAQ is up 1.64% today to 13,694.62. For the year, the NASDAQ is down 12.47%. Again, this is going to continue for the rest of the year. Today was just, I think, in hyper volatility because of Russia attacking Ukraine. But now that has settled down, the market will get back to focusing on the Fed. And again, what the Fed does is not going to be good for the markets in general. So again, there'll be a downward trend. Again, as I've always been saying, the market. I'll be very surprised if the indexes finish up this year. The major indexes finish up this year. There's a lot of headwinds this year as well as next year. The 10-year bond finished today at 1.97%. Oil WTI finished down about 1% to $91.94 a barrel. Gold finished down 1.8793% to $1,890.10. Silver finished down 1.56% to $24.325. In crypto, Bitcoin finished up 1.3% to $39,459.25. Ethereum finished up 3.95% to $2,807.46. And XRP finished up 5.86% to 78 cents. On the economic calendar, PCE inflation year over year jumped from 5.8% to 6.1%. And that's the biggest year over year jump, I think, since the early 1980s. So inflation is still here. The Fed has been incorrect about transitory inflation, and now they're stuck in a corner. They've got to balance the fact that if they raise rates, they could drive the economy into a recession. If they don't raise rates, they're just going to keep on increasing inflation higher and higher. I hope they make the decision to raise rates, because here's what worries me about the Fed decision. Do they make the decision that favors the elites, or do they make the decision that favors everyday Americans? Because quite frankly, everyday Americans cannot afford this ongoing inflation. They just can't. And shame on them if they do not raise interest rates the way they should. Now, their other choice, keep rates low and stock market will continue to go up artificially. But the cost of you to buy a steak is going to be that much more. And believe you me, inflation hits the everyday American much more than it does the people sitting at the Fed or the CEO of JP Morgan. And that's the thing that worries. Are they going to make the political decision, or are they going to make the right decision? So anyway, with that said, thank you for listening and have a good weekend.